So, got the slides? Fantastic. It doesn't take me to tell you that the police service is facing monumental pressures and challenges over the next few years. I guess the comfort is that you're not alone. I do work across public services, both in this country and abroad. And when we do sort of smaller workshops and you do those sorts of classic management or leadership exercises saying what are the trends and what are the challenges, remarkably, actually, they're rather similar. Of course, there's specifics for each service or each sector, but there's a set of challenges and issues which really face all public service organisations over the next decade in most Western developed countries. And I captured this in a phrase around the perfect storm. It's not original, but it's really a moment, a very particular moment in which lots of forces and factors are coming together. And I'll just whisk through these just to give a little bit of scene setting, and I'm sure they're familiar to you. Interestingly, up until a sort of year or 18 months ago, I used a similar slide, but without this box in the bottom right-hand corner around the financial constraints. That's come to dominate our thinking about reductions in public finances, talk of 25 or even 40% reductions in some government departments and some public services. But there are a set of other issues that are around as well, which are equally important, it seems to me, for the police service and for public services generally to address. There are long-term challenges which are becoming more pressing. Interestingly, the first report I read that talked about the ageing society as being the switchover between the numbers in the population of over 65 and numbers 18 was in something like 1975. And there they forecast it as sort of sometime in the 21st century. Of course, it's with us now. These long-term challenges about the ageing society become more pressing. There were prescient articles written in the 1970s and 1980s about internet-based crime, but it's with us now. So there are long-term challenges which are becoming more pressing. There are persistent issues with no clear solution around antisocial behaviour or drug and alcohol abuse. And there are increasing pressures and demands and expectations from the public. I think written about often about the decline of authority or the decline of deference, requirement for 24/7 responsiveness in a way that simply was not the case 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so although the title of this conference is about policing in a recession, those other sets of challenges, of course, continue to be there. And government has ambitions and aspirations beyond just the reduction in the resources going into public services. So what I thought I'd share with you in the 25 minutes or so was some reflections on how public services, including police services in the UK and abroad, are tackling this issue, both very generally. I'll just say a few words about this slide in a moment, and then to go into some more specifics about what we know about what makes organisations and what makes sectors more innovative. How do organisations begin to create the environment and the conditions in which innovation can foster, take place and achieve better results for lower costs? But first, just a word or two about this. I have the privilege of doing lots of work internationally as well as in the UK. And interestingly, if you look at organisations, you look at government departments, you look at public services, there's a sort of debate that goes on between three different approaches at the moment. There's and this is just a clever way or not clever way of holding it together, about an ICE balance, balance between innovation and efficiency and cuts. And so I'm going to say a word about each of these just to set the scene, really. Firstly, around cuts. I have yet to meet, in all the work I've done around policy and with organisations and as a senior manager, an organisation or a service which doesn't have a certain amount of waste or a number of activities that it has grown to do over a period of time that actually it could shed. So I have no doubt there are some areas in police services and other areas, in other services and other sectors, which can be decommissioned, disinvested, whatever polite word we want to use, cuts. I have no doubt that there are other services that we could, perhaps this doesn't apply so much in police, we could ration. We should look to, it seems to me, in a climate of severe resource constraint, eliminate non-core activity. Clearly, unnecessary or ineffective or less than effective bureaucracy is an impediment to police services in a whole number of ways, but we should look to eliminating those sorts of what's often called non-core activity or activity that is better done by a different organisation. This sort of thinking dominates a lot of the responses to the financial situation. It looks to eliminate, reduce the amount of activity that organisations are undertaking. It requires excellent political relationships, because it's all very well for people in Whitehall to say 25% resource reduction. When it comes on the ground to actually facing up to what that means for individual communities and neighbourhoods and estates, it's a very different matter. And to carry any of that through and continuing to forge a trusting relationship requires extraordinary political management and community engagement. I'm always cautious of this bit, though, about reducing to the core. Lots of people talk to me about reducing organisations. What's the core? They go, let's go away and think about what's the real core activities of this organisation. And if you'd asked IBM in the early 1980s what their core activity was, they would have said mainframe computers, and they would have been out of business now. If you'd asked Nokia in the late 1980s to stick to their core business, they'd still be in rubber tyres and not in mobile phones, and would probably be out of business now. So we always have to think very carefully about what our core business is and how it changes according to particular challenges. But there's a whole number of people saying, let's cut our way out of this. So my argument is, yes, there are definitely areas to be cut, but that's not the whole story. The second area that people talk about a lot is in terms of efficiency. Let us lean our way out of this process. Let us use lots of lean engineering to make all our processes more simple, more straightforward, more efficient, and so forth. Let's benchmark ourselves, as we should, both nationally and internationally, and identify those areas where we in our police service are not as good as others, and apply a whole set, there's a whole raft of processes and techniques and methods for creating more efficient processes. I note that I think correct me if I'm wrong, either in an audit commission or national audit office, so I think probably audit commission, it suggested that if you combine both the elimination of non-core activity and made things as efficient as the most efficient services, we might be able to get, I think the figure was something like 12% reduction in the resources required for police services. The thing about both the cuts and efficiencies, it doesn't fundamentally alter the nature of the services that one provides. You're juggling with different inputs and outputs. Can we have fewer officers do this, more civilian staff, less civilian staff, whatever it may be? Should we cut the number of stations that we operate? Should we should we operate them from different locations? Should we cut the opening hours and so forth? It's all about a sort of stretching and squeezing of the current system. But it doesn't, therefore, get us to the place that addresses those future challenges that are not just the financial ones, but those bigger social community challenges that the future will bring. Which is why, increasingly, and why, as your chair indicated in his generous introduction to me, that the word innovation has crept up the dictionary in some senses. I sort of think now that somewhere buried in Whitehall is a sort of computer that controls all the others, and whenever a piece of guidance or a bill or a government document is produced now, if it hasn't got innovation in every other paragraph, then it sort of gets sent back and it's put in. But I want to look at with you, therefore, is not just a sort of general exhortation or encouragement to be innovative, which I think is not particularly helpful, but I want to share with you some of the features, I say, about organisations which in different sectors, in different services, in different countries have managed to be both high-performing and innovative over long periods of time. But just in advance of that. Really what we're talking about here is about the ability to generate and harness new and different sorts of information, new insights, new resources, and critically new suppliers. When we see services transformed, they are generally not with the incumbent, the existing suppliers. They sometimes are. But often the innovative startups, the innovative organisations with the innovative solutions are part of the way in which this gets carried through. So new information, new insights, new resources, new suppliers are all very important to create those new perspective solutions and services, which in a report that colleagues of mine did in the Innovation Unit recently called Radical Efficiency, assembled 180, I think it was, or 184 case studies from around the world where significantly better outcomes at significantly lower cost were achieved by a real focus on innovation. And by innovation, just as a footnote here, don't keep in your head just technology. I'm talking about different organisational innovations, different models of services and so forth. Technology plays its part, it's an enabler, but it's not the innovation itself. Okay, so this comes from looking at, I don't know, hundreds plus high-performing, innovative organisations, both community organisations, voluntary organisations, private sector organisations, public service organisations, government organisations across the world. What is it that's in common about them that enables them to foster really radical innovation that, in those cliches, is game-changing, produces really radically new services for lower cost? And there's sort of 5 buckets that I'm briefly going to talk about in relation to this, around culture and leadership, around support and investment, rewards and incentives, citizen and user engagement, and then this rather more opaque one about openness and scale. So I'm just going to say a word or two about each. What do leaders look like? What are they like in these high-performing, innovative organisations? Well, and I've been fortunate enough to interview and work with many of these people over the years. They are passionate about outcomes. They are completely, ruthlessly, determinedly passionate about their ambitions, their goals, their outcomes, their results. They have a real sense of that and they can communicate it, and there are really clear metrics about what it would mean to succeed. They're passionate about it. They're driven by it. They wake up every day thinking about it and they push their organisation to that. And they're fantastically relaxed about the means of getting there. And it's in that space that innovation is opened up. A real clarity, a real encouragement, a real stretch and ambition in relation to what they're trying to achieve, whether it be around crime reduction, whether it be around community safety, whatever it may be. They have a real clarity about this, about their core aspirations and ambitions, but they're relaxed about the means and the processes for getting there. They are focused on a limited number of priorities and challenges. There's lots talked about people saying, we want everyone in our organisation to be innovative. Frankly, I don't want everyone in my organisation to be innovative. I mean, if I go and I need brain surgery, I don't want the neurosurgeon to be thinking, oh, well, I wonder what sort of I might play with in David's brain today. I sort of would like them to use, existing best practice, not think about the innovation at that point. But more seriously, what we discover in these organisations is they take 2 or 3 or 4 major challenges and they focus their innovation effort around it. They take 3 or 4 really tricky, difficult issues that their organisation is facing and really focus the resource effort, the innovation effort around that. Fourthly, they're fantastically externally oriented. These are people who are hungry. The leaders of high-performing innovative organisations are hungry to learn about other sectors, other countries, other organisations, about what their users or customers or consumers or public or citizens think and feel and respond to in terms of their organisations. They are as interested in what is happening, or more interested in what's happening in the front line and in the transactions and the engagements with the public than as they are with what's happening in middle management and in internal processes. They are externally focused. And they value and resource. They talk about innovation and risk-taking, but they don't talk about it in a sort of fluffy way. I think there's often a problem that people think about innovation as sort of, you know, it's all beanbags and post-its and various other things. There are some fantastically disciplined methods, tools, which I'll talk about in a moment. And these people value disciplined innovation and risk-taking. So the culture and leadership of these organisations, whatever they are, whether they're in retail, in education, in police, or in software, these characteristics are shared by leaders across those organisations. Secondly, they have support and investment for innovation. This is a really, really tricky area at the moment. There we are, faced with horrendous cuts in the finances to our services. And yet, we know that the only way in which we will really come out of that in a healthy position is by being able to find a way of investing a certain amount of money and resource and time into developing new models and new services and so forth. This isn't peculiar to public services, by the way. Nearly every nearly every private company, private sector organisation at the moment is going through exactly that. They know we're facing really difficult times. But they also know that not investing in the R&D and the innovation for the future will mean that they will be in even more desperate straits later on and down the track. So an innovation budget is crucial. My view is actually it doesn't matter too much how big or how small at the beginning. It matters that you're dedicating some resource to that. And secondly, as I've already mentioned, is about discipline, methods and processes. It used to be thought that it was enough to find somebody who had, venture capitalists used to do this, you know, when the venture capital industry started or when innovation starts in various sectors, they used to hunt around and find people who are innovative and drop a bit of money on them to help them and then sort of wait and in 3-5 years come back and see what happens sort of thing. Very quickly, they learned that actually, if we're to get the best out of our innovators, we need to be able to wrap around them the methods and processes, the tools and techniques that are likely to enhance the possibility of success of that innovation. So I might have a really wonderful or crazy idea about some piece of software, but I might be completely rubbish at marketing. I might be completely hopeless at understanding things about prototyping and so forth. So when we find our innovators, or where there are those potential innovators, being able to wrap around them those discipline methods is a really critical point. So support and investment for the innovators is crucial. Equally important in these organisations is some incentive for the people who adopt and adapt innovation. Actually, one of the problems in public services and in the police service, in my view, is, as you all know, you can go to virtually any police service, any police force around this country or elsewhere, and you will find something going on that is genuinely innovative and interesting. And the problem is that you can go back 5 years later and it's probably still in that one place. It probably hasn't even spread across that service, that force, that authority, never mind to neighbouring ones, never mind system-wide. And part of the reason for that is we've got slightly better at giving some support and investment to the innovators, but we haven't yet quite got right about getting the financial, developmental and reputational incentives and rewards for those people who just adopt. There's an honour in copying and stealing and taking the ideas from others. That's what these high-performing innovative organisations do all the time. Don't fool yourself that it's all generated from within. They're scouring the country, the sectors, other places to just find those nuggets of what's important. Okay. This is just one example of the discipline, methods and process. It's the organisation that I'm privileged to direct or chair, which is the innovation unit. We use this. It's just a very simple framework. It's in your slide pack. I'm not going to go through it now, but it's just to indicate that there are a whole range of disciplines that one can bring to bear on the innovation process. It is not a case of just taking people into a room with, you know, a set of nice cartoons or whatever it may be. There are some really rigorous ways of approaching all these issues. I just want to say a little bit about those two other buckets. One about firstly about openness and scale. And in a sense, I've already said something about the left-hand side. There's the unfortunate truth. The unfortunate truth is most radical, game-changing innovations come from outside of organisations. If you've been in an organisation any length of time, you get used to the way in which things are done. If you you just become involved in the culture of that organisation, you get used to that being the procedure and the process. You can think about how to tweak it a little bit, how to modify it a little bit, how to make it a little bit more efficient. But actually, the really big changing ideas often come from outside or come from the margins. And therefore, these high-performing innovative organisations are very good at being very open to new models, new providers, new ideas, and individuals from other sectors and other countries. This is a real conundrum, it seems to me, for the police service, where we have a very controlled entrance which goes up through the ranks and, in a sense, creates a relatively closed community. That has fantastic power and importance and builds trust and builds collegiality in many ways. Its disadvantage is it closes itself off to the influences that often come from bringing in different sorts of people and so on. So Xerox, when they were recently advertising for people who are to help them redesign their the overall interfaces of their machines, had this great advert which said, wanted artists, playwrights, dramatists, anthropologists, etc. And then at the bottom, in little letters, it said, and a few system engineers. Well, the reason they do this is because they know that those really new insights and perspectives will generally come from outside. So openness is pretty important, as is networking between organisations. Actually, I haven't looked at this data on the police, but actually people tend to stay put quite a lot in public services in this country. And actually, we know that innovation travels and different ideas come from people moving across organisations. So how could we begin to foster some of that? And then stuff that you know more about scale, and is very, very live debate in terms of police services, in terms of the number of authorities that there should be. But what we do know is that scale, although it has disadvantages in terms of removal from immediate community and neighbourhood interests, has real advantages around the ability to pool risk, to take proven innovations and establish real protocols and standards around that, and of course conventional economies of scale. So something about openness and scale. And then lastly, I just want to say something before leaving you just with a thought, which will be, or set of thoughts, which will be actually relatively familiar to you, is around the issue of citizen and user engagement. Now, this is an area that has grown enormously over the last 10 or 20 years, but actually in public services we are a long way behind the curve. We still do lots of consultation that's bringing people into rooms and giving them sort of a piece of paper or documents to refer back to, or occasionally asking them a few questions. We occasionally put together user groups or focus groups and so forth. Actually, none of these high-performing innovative organisations do that at all. It's not they're not in touch or engaged with their users, quite the contrary. They establish very different sorts of relationships with their users or their consumers, their customers, their publics. They establish relationships which are about, terrible piece of jargon, about co-producing, co-designing the services. They are about sitting down with them and working with them to actually design what the services would be that meets the needs of the users as well as the service itself. Their relationships change. People cease to be just users but become those co-producers of services. And they also do something which we rarely do. In fact, we often do the reverse in public services, which is they reach out for their most difficult users. I'm hopeless for Apple. I love my Apple iPhone. I love it. And if people in Apple ask me sort of, how could it be improved? I'll tell them, well, I'd quite like it if it was a bit thinner, or it did this little thing and so on. It's hopeless for them in terms of their innovation strategy. What they like is people who say, I think this is completely rubbish. You know, what I really want is something that does A, B, and C that the phone doesn't do already, something that's completely different. Right? So they go to those people who are most dissatisfied with their products and services, who are most extreme users of their products and services. They harness that intelligence, they harness that insight, they harness that information. So they create a different sort of engagement between citizens and users. So, in 1 minute 52 seconds, I shall just say a word, a rather familiar word, but just to try and bring some of this together anyway. And what does all this mean in practice? And of course, this is really tricky because I could have taken internet crime or terrorist threat or whatever, and we could have played it out on there, and people would say, yeah, but there's lots of stuff around sort of low-level crime and antisocial behaviour. So live with the fact that in the time available, I chose to take one and just say, what might this actually mean? How might we go about this? We know this is an area that consumes a considerable amount of police time. There's strong evidence that left untackled, a significant proportion of people engaged in low-level crime and antisocial behaviour migrate to higher levels of crime. Hence all the stuff over the last 20 years now, I guess, on sort of broken windows. If you can nip these sorts of activities in the bud and you can catch these people and work with these people and work with communities at a lower level, you can stop or reduce higher levels of crime. And quite straightforwardly, what am I saying here if we're to have three messages coming out of this? Firstly, critically, it's about setting up disciplined experimentation. It's not about just having a few little pilots wandering around trying their own thing. It's about saying, how do we really approach this? How do we apply what we know about supporting really robust and disciplined innovation in this context? And how do we do that with the support from organisations who are expert in this? And I think Michael Bishard talked a bit this morning maybe about the Design Council, the Innovation Unit's another one. There's a whole host of these organisations that can help in designing and supporting these sort of disciplines in a way that involves the police, other agencies, perpetrators and communities to generate innovative models. Now, it's not like I think none of that has been done. Far from it. I think rather a lot of it has been done. But it has been done in a relatively undisciplined way without those techniques, whether they be rapid prototyping, service redesign, etc., that could be brought into play. This would, and I believe there are many examples around the world where this has happened, hand back primary responsibility to communities and release police resources. And people have said to me recently, and quite where do you think we might get the money to do that? So I just leave you with the tantalising thought that part of the implementation of the coalition government's policy around the big society is to create a big society bank, precisely to start to develop the community organisations that could hold some of that responsibility, and therefore the possibility of leveraging in some of that resource may be there.